Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another episode of the show. We're in the middle of July, and if you're like me and you're focused on basketball and football, it's kind of a bad time for sports content, right? Because the NBA Summer League is kind of wrapping up, and it's in its off season. NFL's in its off season. WNBA is All Star break. MLB just had its All Star break. So it's a little bit of a slower time, which gives us an opportunity to talk about some other stuff. And a topic I've really wanted to really get into for months now, I just haven't had the right guest to do it, is to talk about sports movies, a genre that I'm very fascinated by and interested in. If there's a new sports movie, I'm generally interested in watching it. So to join me to talk about this and some other things regarding the film and sports genre is Drew Davis. Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
Man, I appreciate you having me, Omar. Two of my favorite things, movies and sports.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know Drew, he is a podcaster himself. He has a great show title, Too Good to Be Drew, which we'll talk about later on towards the end of the show here. And so Drew is a great person who, has background in sports, background in media and all that, and really want to kind of pick your brain about this genre. So first things first, Drew, what do you think draws us into these sports movies? Like, you see a movie and it's like, oh, I remember that team, and then you decide to want to see the film adaptation. What's the sauce in sports movies, in your opinion, that really makes us interested in them?
I think there's a couple things, and I just think, I think we can all go back to our younger years where we I'm not going to say everybody plays sports, but we can remember being at recess, shooting hoops, playing football, running around. And so kind of that sports is kind of a little bit ingrained in us. But also, it's just we look at sports and they're a way to tell a story. And then also doing it in the movie is a really, really hard way. But I think, everybody's imagined themselves winning a Super Bowl or playing for a championship or catching the winning touchdown, making the winning basket. Those things that come with just team camaraderie and just overcoming stuff like life. We love a good story about somebody overcoming things. We don't like somebody that was born with the silver spoon in their mouth and got everything they needed and real successful in business and they're billionaire. Like, we like the person that, came from nothing, that worked their way up, that got a chance. And just things like that. And so sport exemplifies that. And it's usually, some usually lower class or lower economical stuff that happens. Like, we could talk about Major League Baseball. And my girlfriend was talking to me the other day and she was like, they were doing introducing all these people and none of them were from America. Like, they're all from the DR and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But that's because with, a ball and a stick, you have baseball over there and you get really good if you can just use a small stick and hit a baseball. So just the combination of just things that make us really interested in other people's story, which is a feel-good story, a down and out story, a overcoming adversity story. It just always has a good amalgamation of those things.
Yeah, it's the ultimate cinematic real life experience, right? Where it's so often came up from nothing to become something. I was recently listening to an interview with Chris Hine, who's the author of the Anthony Edwards biography. And, this similar type situation where somebody growing up in Atlanta and, when you're growing up in certain environments, it's, people just automatically assume it's going to be uphill climb. And through his ability, he's able to reach the highest heights of professional basketball. And those are stories we love, right? And those are stories that we really want to see portrayed. And I always feel like when it goes cinematic, it has an added level of gravitas. One thing I kind of think about too here, Drew, is that it's almost a lot of these movies historically have been pretty formulaic, right? Where it's like, oh, coach comes to this busted team or a great player comes to this bad team and they end up figuring things out. And then, after the rough patch, they end up, really humming. And then towards the end, there's a climax of them either winning a championship or winning an important game. And, but we still just go and see it. It's almost like a superhero movie. You kind of know what's going to happen. So is it just that we like the formula so we keep on coming back, or is it just something deeper than that?
I think it's funny because keep saying it, but I was thinking about all the questions we're gonna go over, and I was like, it's a combination of things, but it's with sports and with movies, you have this hard thing to do, and I went to acting school for a while, so I studied it a little bit, and you either you get really good actors, and then you get people to play the background or people to do all these stunts or jumps and things like that, or you get really good athletes and you might skip out on the acting. So I think it's that combination of we're going to see this movie, but all right, how much of the sport are we getting versus how much of the off the field are we getting? How much of good acting are we getting, opposed to just good action, And I think just like just like us, I don't know about you, but I'm a sports person. If there's football on, I'm most likely gonna
Yeah,
watch it. Now,
for sure.
not UFL, but if there's any type of football on, it could be the two worst teams in the league. I'll be like, all right, I'll watch for a quarter. So I
Mhm.
think it's that gets us in the theater, knowing that there aren't very many sports movies that are made as well because they're pretty difficult to do. And I think just those couple of things make us go, okay, Samuel Jackson's a basketball coach. All right, I'll go see that. Ben Affleck is a basketball coach. All right, I like Ben. I'll go see that.
Mhm.
And you just kind of want to see, and it's always usually some younger actors too, because if you're doing high school or college or something like that, it's probably these up and coming actors, and you could be like, oh man, I saw him in whatever it was. So it's this mix of things that gets us involved and keeps us interested. And like I said, they're hard to make. So I think when we go to the movies and we see one that's good, I think we're very surprised.
It's such a good point. It reminds me when Friday Night Lights came out, and the movie, not the show. And always got to distinguish that. And I'm not into high school football. I don't know anything about Odessa Permian or the Texas high school football scene, but I was like, this seems pretty interesting. And then, I obviously recognize Billy Bob Thornton and all that. I'm just kind of like, let me go ahead and watch this. It goes like, how bad could it really be? And it turned out to be a really good movie. So, uh, sports as a general, or sports movies as a general concept, are kind of, I think they have the base level thing that gets you in, which is the action of the sports or a personality that you find interesting. You mentioned Samuel Jackson, Coach Carter. That's the guy going into the inner city and trying to make their basketball team something. That's a fascinating story. But there's also the underlying commentary that we see, especially in more recent sports movies, where you're talking about social economic situations, people with like single parents and trying to survive, living off government assistance. You also have stuff about not being able to eat and poverty, and additionally, you also have race as a kind of driving force behind a lot of these movies. And like I think about something like Remember the Titans, for example. It's a Disney movie, right? And but there's a very real racial commentary going on in that film, right? And do you think that this is kind of a great, or that this medium is a great way for us to kind of have these more difficult conversations? Maybe somebody is going to see a movie that they just thought was about football, but
Mhm.
they see something about, a conversation about the wealth gap between different races and stuff like that. Do you think that as a medium for sparking conversation, sports movies are kind of in a upper echelon in that regard, when it comes to different types of media that we consume?
Yeah, I think they're good conversation starters, and that's also the thing. Like, it depends on who you're going to see the movie with. So if your friend group is all white and you go see Remember the Titans, you're like, wow, that's crazy. It used to be like that, and knowing that that can still be like that in certain places in Texas or the South or things of that nature in towns.
Mhm.
But I think they are good conversation starters, and I also think they're difficult because you have people that are like, oh, it's a movie. That was a good movie. And knowing that it's steeped in truth, but exactly how much truth it is and how much you can find out, it would take you to go like do some research and for you to ask some people. But I think it's a good starting point because it brings it to the forefront. And from what I know, the people that go see movies go see movies. There's not too many people who don't like movies that end up going for a certain reason, or maybe it's referred to them. But the people that go see movies. And in my experience, those people are a little bit more open to what's going on in the world and being able to sit down and watch something to see it. And you talked about Remember the Titans and, having a prominent actor like Denzel in there and a lot of younger dudes who are, still doing great things now that were young actors in. But it does open up a little bit of the world to some people who might be a little bit sheltered. And honestly, I don't think we make, enough of those movies because let's be honest, it's Hollywood and they're always going to say, all right, is this going to get us money? Okay, no, bottom line, no, move that out of here. And like I said, they're going to doctor it up a little bit. So I do think they're great conversation starters. And I think we also have to take that from the movie and from those conversations with friends and also apply that in the world if we're going to want to see real change.
Let's talk a little bit about storytelling in these movies. One of my favorite sports movies ever is Any Given Sunday, and which it's just loaded for in terms of cast. You know, Al Pacino, Jamie Foxx, Cameron Diaz. You just have a lot of Lawrence Taylor, former NFL legend, is in that movie as well. And I look at that movie as a great example of storytelling because it has so many different stories going on at the same time. You have the ascendance of a young, flashy quarterback and new
Mhm.
generation with Jamie Foxx. You have the old coach trying to figure out new things in Al Pacino, and then you have Cameron Diaz as this owner who inherited this team and the pitfalls that come with owning a franchise, especially as a woman. So
Yeah.
I look at that as a just a masterpiece of storytelling and different levels of storytelling. And because I feel like if you just wanted sports action, you could have watched a documentary, right?
Mhm.
And so talk to me a little bit why that storytelling piece is so important and how you also have, sports movies that don't really involve sports,
Yeah.
Jerry Maguire is a great example. It's about the agent, or Two for the Money is about sports gambling, so what is the role of storytelling in these movies and what's an example do you think of a really good storytelling sports movie?
Man, we're on the same page. Friday Night Lights is one of my favorite movies, but also Any
Mhm.
Given Sunday. When it comes to a football movie that's raw and goes to those little dark corners of stuff you don't
Mhm.
see, the partying, the drugs, the women, the relationship stuff that Jamie Foxx is going through. And it's actually funny because you brought it up, and I forgot until you just said it. But I just watched Dennis Quaid in The Rookie, who's
Mhm.
also the older quarterback who's trying to finish out his career and trying to come back from that injury in Any Given Sunday.
Right.
But storytelling is very important. And like you said, it depends on what angle people want to attack it from. Like you said, Jerry Maguire is it's a sports movie, but it's just about being an agent. Like it's just about that side and him dealing with his client. And you hit the nail on the head with Any Given Sunday. There's just so many different angles that it depends. Like, people go into it and there's some good football in there and they did a really good job. But if you go in there and you're like, dang, well, I never thought of, the backup quarterback becoming the starting quarterback and then him leaving his wife or girlfriend or cheating on her or whatever it is, or getting his car cut open by the linebacker for him saying something about who carries the team. So the storytelling is very important because it allows you to see what you probably didn't think about. You go in there to see football, but you see so many other things, and you're like, geez, and you have to question yourself, is it really like that? And then you look at the writing and oh, this is good writing and this is good acting. Oh, that linebacker really played linebacker and he's a a Hall of Fame linebacker at that. So that's what I mean about that nice little balance with, all right, do we get good actors? Do we get good people who play sports? Do we focus on the game? Do we focus on, the conversations, the doctor conversations of hanging your cleats up when you have an injury and but you got this bonus you got to get to. So you hit the nail on the head when you said, yo, there's so many different angles and they did a great job in hitting all these angles. And I think that's what goes into a great movie and not trying to overload it, but these are just the things that are going on and these are the things that they find out a way to talk about. And so the storytelling is very important because it sets the tone and going forward for other movies are like, oh, well, do we need more of that? And then if you have a movie that does too much, oh, do we need less of that? And so you have this balance with people trying to recreate this thing. And like we talked about, why do we keep going to see these movies? We want to see what new or what's interesting that's being brought to the table that we didn't see before, and knowing that there's less than 1% of the population that can play at the highest level, that does play at the highest level. I think that's what makes it continuously intriguing for us to go see. So the storytelling is a part of that, and a story can be made from storytelling and it can also fall apart from not being good or just glossing over something.
You brought something up there that I want to touch on. And so obviously you have a background playing football, right? You were in the NFL and all that, and you played at a high level in college. And so when you are watching a movie adaptation, one of the funny things to always see is like how well or how poorly do they nail the action scenes, right? Like I think there's this viral video that has been going on for years. It was like some girls basketball game, and it's like the time on the clock just doesn't even add up. It's like it's supposed to be 5 seconds, the scene's like a minute long, and it's just like comedic. So for you as somebody who played, right, and at a high level as well, it wasn't like you're only playing pee wee football, right?
Mhm.
And what do you find yourself like super critical of it's like man, quarterback's not throwing it like that, or a receiver isn't making that move, especially for you, a guy who played receiver, right? So like, do you kind of analyze it with a finer tooth comb than somebody like me would who never played football at a high level?
I'm not super critical of it. I think because I go in there saying it's a movie, like I'm like,
Right.
unless
Yeah.
you, and I know they have, specialists there, like coaches or, people that have been around football that can say, hey, this kind of wouldn't go like this, it would go like this. But that's one thing when we talk about making movies, like the cutting and editing is hard, and I learned that more in acting school when I went. But, you can miss something very easily. And I think the movie you're talking about, I think it's Love and Basketball, because I remember I think my girlfriend was watching it and it was towards the end of the game when I think she gave up the ball and she had to go back and take a charge or something.
Mm,
Or I think the score was off or something. I was like, hold on,
right.
why are they trying to score and they're up by like it was something crazy. But I'm not too critical only because I know how hard it is to make sports movies. And like I said, you choose the acting or you choose the athlete. And then also after that, it's, how are you guys shooting the scenes? And I know how hard it is to get the same exact hit on the same exact tackle or sack or all these camera angles that have to be, taken into consideration. So I'm a little bit lenient as long as it's not anything crazy.
Right.
And there's a very good book. I'm pretty sure you might have heard it or read it because you got all those books back there. But it's called Baseball the Movie. And it talks
Mm,
about all the good baseball movies or bad baseball movies. And it talks about how it's kind of fallen off up to the point we're at. Like we don't have baseball movies, but
right.
it's also because it doesn't sell in Hollywood. And then also it's just very hard to do. You're panning to somebody swinging the bat versus following that ball versus them running versus, somebody throwing it across the field. Like there's all these different editing and cutting techniques that need to be done. So I'm a little bit lenient just because I know it's a lot of hard work and I wouldn't want to do it. But outside of that, when it's done really well, you can really tell. And nobody's going to get it 100% exactly right. But like I said, any given Sunday, that one for me is one of the best ones to see and to enjoy.
Yeah, and there's certain movies that kind of stick out in terms of they brought in athletes for it, right? Like Blue Chips is a example everybody thinks about with Shaq, and He Got Game with Ray Allen is another one that a lot of people kind of point to. And it's like you said, you pick the athlete talent or you pick the acting talent, and you kind of try to make it work one way or the other. And I think if you have the acting talent, like all right, we got to really lean into the story here, right? Because we don't really want to have get clowned over these bad scenes, and they're just so hyper analyzed these days. And kind of looking at the genre here, it's been going strong now for about 50 years, you could say, really since the 70s when a lot of these movies started to regain their popularity. And I feel like it's evolved a lot. And what it used to be to me, you think of somebody like Hoosiers or Rudy, it was the super feel good aspect, right? It's like, oh, win one for the Gipper, that whole thing. And that was like very wholesome, and apropos of the era in the 70s and 80s to a certain extent. But as time has gone on, we've seen edgier, darker, not as cut and dry as the protagonist team wins the championship. So, how do you see the genre as evolving? Like, how do you think it's evolved, over this last, 40, 50 years?
I think that was a good point by you by saying, go from win one for the Gipper or just about being a walk on and winning a spot and, catching a pass or a touchdown pass in the game to win you guys a game. Now I think there's, like I said, there's a lot more angles they're trying to hit it from. It's
Mm,
not just the football aspect, it's the mental health side, the relationship side. Injury is a big one that I've seen over the last couple of years. How, you just don't hear about a player getting hurt and then bam, we sweep them off to the side and we keep going. Like they followed that person through rehab, through therapy, coming back, what that next step in life looks like. But also, I think you see, I blanked on it, but I think you see more the that the power has gone to the players now, that it's more
Mm,
about their brand, that is more about, okay, let's follow this person doing a commercial. Okay, this is a star quarterback, what does that look like? Even outside of the building, okay, party, magazine shoot, supermodel girlfriend, like all that type of stuff. And so you see the autonomy kind of moving towards athletes as a brand, which I like, which I enjoy. And then you also see about just the hardships, the social media, what it's like when you have a bad game. I know this isn't a movie, and I didn't watch it that much, but watching Ballers on HBO,
mm.
like you can see like what they're trying to do, the positions they're trying to get in, what The Rock was trying to do in certain aspects. But you can see that journey a little bit more. So there's more autonomy in just the journey and what they're going through and experiencing as an athlete, the good and the bad and the ugly.
You talked about the show aspect, and it reminds me of the Winning Time show that was on HBO, which is adapted from a Jeff Pearlman book, which I read and is very good, about the Showtime Lakers. And I think if that show was made in the 90s, it would have been made so much differently than it was in our current generation, because we want to see the dealings of Jerry Buss. We want to see, Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's personal life. Whereas back then, I feel like it might have been a little bit more focused on the story that happened on the court, playing the Sixers in the finals, or, matching up with Larry Bird in Boston, that whole thing. Whereas the show, with a modern lens, it just peeled back the onion a couple of layers. And I personally, a lot of people, I feel like a lot of times as you get older, people fall into the trap of the good old days, right?
Mhm.
Like, music was only good when I was a teenager. Movies were only good when I was going to the theater. Blah blah blah. Remember, like I write for Knicks Fan TV, and we're in our Slack group chat. And yesterday, people were opining. We're all in our mid to late 30s. We're all opining about stores that existed, in the 90s and 2000s, right? And everybody's going to have that. But I feel like sports movies really are one of the few things where they've actually gotten better as time has gone on, in
Mhm.
terms of the way they present the information and the way that it's delivered to us. And, so when people say, "Oh, what's the greatest sports movie ever?" A lot of times people like default to super older movies like Hoosiers. And I was like, yeah, it's a really good movie, but I feel like it lacks the depth of some of this newer stuff. And maybe that's a controversial thing to say because everybody just is so rooted in nostalgia, Drew. But, I just wonder, like, what the next step is. Like, the F1 movie just came out. A lot of people saying that's pretty good. Although 60-year-old Brad Pitt as a race car driver feels a little far fetched to me, but that's Brad Pitt. He's going to get that role, but that's the politics of show business. But yeah, it's just I just do feel like it's really increased in quality. I mean, do you see it the same way, or do you think it was better maybe a few decades ago?
I think it's funny. I think it's increased in quality, but I'm not sure about in writing. Like I would say,
Mm,
like visually in the
yeah,
scenes or the action scenes and stuff like that. And like I was talking about this with my friend, I was just like, I was watching some Ace Ventura movies, and I was like, yo, the writing is really good. And I don't know if they, because they had the time to be able to write it, and it was they took a little bit more time with it, opposed to now where it's like, yo, we got to get this greenlit, we got to get this going. Like, you get a short amount of time to do it.
right.
But like I said, there's a lot more angles you can have on something. And back in the day, or it was more so like, all right, you got the coach who's probably one of the most important people in the movie, you got a star player or the team aspect. But now I think they're diving more into, the starting five, or, four out of the five, where a little bit more than you used to. So I would say the quality has improved from the shots and the scenes. But as far as the writing or just the quality of the movie as a whole, I really like a lot of stuff from back in the day. Because for me, For Love of the Game is one I love. I've played baseball as my first sport, and so baseball is a little bit more intimate to me.
Mm.
And like I said, now we don't really watch baseball. Or you ask somebody under 25, hey, you watching baseball? They're like, no, I don't do that at all. They're changing. They're making rule changes to the game to get you to the park. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and you made a really good point about writing, which I kind of want to elaborate on. I, as somebody who does writing, right? I post on Medium, I contribute to a couple different websites, so I'm in it, and there's a pressure of timeliness now that becomes a just a pressure for a writer in these days. And you think about with shows and movies, you have all these tight deadlines and people want to get it out in a timely manner when people still care about the thing, especially with a movie. It takes so much longer to produce than really anything else. But yeah, it's something that the writing pressure has just increased so much, and it becomes I think difficult to formulate truly profound writing. And maybe
Hmm.
back then it was just a little bit better. So that's a really good point. And I think that maybe that's a moment of inflection for us where we want to maybe consider waiting a little bit longer is probably worth it. We see the music all the time, where an artist comes out with too much too soon, and then you just get flooded, and it's not even good anymore. So I want to pivot to documentaries. We mentioned them a little bit earlier. Obviously, a different type of storytelling, where it's fully rooted in interview. In fact, it's more journalistic. And documentaries, I want to say, over the last 20 years, have really increased in terms of sports docs. ESPN's 30 for 30 was a big proponent of this. Netflix has done their Untold series with varying degrees of success. I think there have been some good ones, but also some bad ones. Why do you think that we've seen a popularity increase here with sports docs really since the turn of the century?
I think a lot of we want to see the behind the scenes stuff. Like,
Mhm.
not to say that documentaries can't be, like I talked about earlier, prettied up like Hollywood, or with Hollywood trying to figure out, all right, how can we change this a little bit to get a little bit of extra money, or just to let it land a little bit. Like you're really seeing, the for me, and when I think about documentary, I think it's passion projects by people, and so you can kind of see the work that's been done, like work that wouldn't be done for a whole movie.
Mhm.
And from what I know about documentaries, they try to keep it more true to form, as far as, all right, this is what happened. You're talking to players, or you're talking to people that have direct knowledge or direct experience of the situation. But also, like, I can also see that people aren't trying to go through uh you know uh studios and executives, like the big wig stuff that might take it a while. You want to do this documentary, and like you talked about, writing something, you want it to come out in a timely manner, because while people are talking about this, and not 2 weeks, a month and a half later, where people are already off it. And so you want it to move quicker, and there are a lot more avenues for it to move quicker now, with Netflix, with ESPN 30 for 30s, like you talked about. And I think that they see that there's a demand for it. Like, cool, I'm not trying to sit down maybe for an hour and a half and hour 45 and watch a movie about this, but I'll see a 30, 45-minute documentary about it that's real concise and really tight. And so I think it's those things that, and just like I was thinking about just Oklahoma City, like a basketball fan in general, yeah, they probably want to see a documentary about Oklahoma City, but probably, the Oklahoma fans, or people in Oklahoma and people in Seattle, are dying to see it, because they want to know, you know what I mean? They have a little bit more behind the scenes knowledge of what's going on and what went on, and how they are about it. So I would say, like, those things make me more prone to go see a documentary, or just be like, huh, I didn't know. And I'm a lifelong learner, so once
Right.
you put something in front of me that I'm probably like, dang, I didn't even know about, okay, man, I'll watch that. I'll spend 45 minutes of my life looking at that.
It reminded me of the way we cover things now. We just want to know more. We want to know the motivations and why this happened. A good example. So I lived in Detroit for a number of years, and I actually, you mentioned Seattle. I moved to the Seattle area a couple years ago, and the Netflix sports team, they came out with a documentary called Sign Stealer, about Connor Stallions, a guy who was stealing signs for the University of Michigan football team. And it talks about his story and what the lead up to him getting into that. And it was a fascinating. It was, and to be fair, it's kind of Connor Stalions propaganda, or University of Michigan propaganda, to be honest. And like Netflix's Swamp Kings about the Florida Gators, and during the Urban Meyer era were like that. Like, how you're going to have an Urban Meyer Florida Gators movie and not mention Aaron Hernandez once? Kind of weird. So, but we want to see that, right? We want to see what motivated Connor Stallions to do what he did, what motivated these people to act the way they acted, and the ripple effect that it caused. One of the best sports docs I've ever seen was the one about OJ, which is OJ Made in America, 5-parter
Yep.
that ESPN did. And that one, the thing when a sports doc is great, I think, is when you can really highlight institutional things that led to something. The first episode of the OJ doc is really just setting up the racial environment in California in the 70s and how he, as a prominent black athlete, wanted to be viewed on his own merit as opposed to his skin color. And
Mhm.
that kind of, and the ripple effect that that had during the civil rights movement and, during the police riots and stuff that went on in LA in that era. So I think that's where they shine, is giving us detail, but also having storytelling, right? Being able to convert that into something that we could kind of correlate so much. And with the OJ example, you have his relationship with his wife, and that's kind of brought up, as to how that happened, how that matriculated, and the significance of it all, right? And then you see the unleashing of this monster, right? And that's what the story really becomes. And I think documentaries can do that when they are good. When they're bad, it's like it's like regular cinematic movies. When they're great, they're great, but when they're bad, they can get really bad, right? And and I always go back to that Swamp Kings one where it's just like, obviously, if the player or coach is going to be involved in the production, it's going to skew with a certain lens and again be kind of propaganda-ish. But within you need some level of journalistic integrity there, right? You can't just everything can't just be a fluff piece. And so I always feel like there's a balance there. But I think people are going to want more of that. Like you look at the Court of Gold that Netflix did about the U.S. men's Olympic basketball team. And I watched that tournament. I thought it was fascinating just because I personally don't like a one team being super dominant, right?
Yeah.
Even though I'm an American citizen and you think you'd want the US to win every time, but I want to see a blowout every game. It's not fun basketball. So to me, the interesting thing was the elevation of Serbia, the elevation of Germany, the elevation of France on the international stage. And it created really good basketball. And that documentary, one thing that it really did for me was, I think beforehand we all had this vision of what Nikola Jokic was. It's just like, I don't care. I'm so apathetic, whatever. Let me get back to Serbia and race my horses. But in this movie, you saw him behind in the locker room, intense with his coach, intense with his
Mhm.
players, being a leader. And you're like, oh, he has that in him. He just portrays this different type of persona during press conferences. He has a button that he turns on and off, right? And I think that's something that goes very appreciated. Are there any documentaries you've seen that really kind of stick out to you like that you're just like, wow, I really appreciate the story?
Man, I can't remember off the just what you saying that in the OJ documentary. Like I think the educational aspect is what always pulls me into. Like we go there for the story, but
Right.
what else do we learn outside of this that we had no clue about? And I think that's what makes when people are very close and like I said, they're passion project for people, that they do the extra work to make the story better. Of course you can everybody, not everybody, the majority of the world knows about the OJ stuff and when it happened and everything, but the people that aren't from California and aren't from LA don't know about those interactions with the black community and the police and things that were going on around that time. But honestly, I wonder if it's a documentary, but The Last Dance, like we were all
Yeah.
bored during COVID, and I'm not going to say everybody knows about Michael Jordan, but there's a generation that knows, yo, Michael Jordan is probably the greatest basketball player. And I have his shoes not because it's the cool thing to do, but because I know Michael Jordan was a beast.
Right.
And just the behind the scenes on Michael Jordan, because a lot of us, or we don't know a lot about him, outside of the aspect of being a champion on the court and because he's very tight knit in what he says and what he does. And so for us and for me, that was a very good time to just sit back and hear him talk about, Scotty and Dennis Rodman and exactly what they were going through, him retiring and coming back. That's one that stands out in my eyes. And, everybody was glued to that. I remember every little, sports show I listened to or podcast that I listened to, they were going and, doing content from it from, hey,
Right.
this is the first two episodes. This is what happened. What do you think about this? So I thought that was a very, very good one because it showed like how hard he worked. And then also just he was very good, but it just also showed like, that he was on a path, on a war path pretty much to after he got past the Pistons and to keep that level of excellence up.
Yeah, The Last Dance is a great example of why timing is everything because, he put it out basically because the heat from LeBron was coming. It was, It was after the 2016 finals, and LeBron was really starting to challenge the notion of who the greatest basketball player ever was, right? And so he's like, all right, it's time for me to remind people, right? And so then he comes out with this 10-part documentary that happens to hit. Obviously, he didn't plan COVID. No one knows, right? But it hits, during COVID, and everybody's at home. There's no sports. Like the only sports that were on at that time, I think, was the Korean baseball league. And nobody was waking up at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock Eastern in the AM to watch Korean baseball, right? And and so it's just like it was the only thing on that was new content, and so you got to relive the late '80s with his battles with Boston and Detroit, and then into his championship era with both repeats, and then you got to see, a little bit behind the scenes with Jerry Krause, what that was like, and then the Scottie Pippen stuff. And Scottie came out looking real bad there,
Yeah.
in that one, and I think that's kind of caused a ripple effect for his relationship with Jordan in the time since. But yeah, I agree. That one has a high replay value for me. It's 10 parts, so it's not a short watch, but if it's a situation where I don't know what to watch or I got nothing on, I'm like, let me just go ahead and restart Last Dance. It's kind of like one of those shows, one of those films that I kind of go back to. We talked a lot about various movies have been brought up, but I kind of want to know, what are a few of your favorites? Like when I tell you, hey, sports movies, name three that you would watch anytime. What are they?
Okay, I'm gonna grab my phone. I just want to. So even before I knew we were gonna have this talk, I just like, all right, let me go see the sports movies. Let me type in on Google. Let me just go
Yeah.
through stuff. And it's funny because even some of the movies I came across, like we talked about earlier, some of them are sports movies, but you forget that they're a sport. Like Talladega Nights or The Gambler. Just stuff like that where you're like, Secretariat, where it's horse racing or something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm just name all these movies just as they popped up, just because I was interested. So if you don't mind, I'm good to do that. All right.
Good.
Coach Carter, Rocky, Creed, The Longest Yard, White Man Can't Jump, Bad News Bears, Talladega Nights, Ford vs. Ferrari, Ali, The Karate Kid, Any Given Sunday, The Program, Mighty Ducks, Remember the Titans, Major League, The Sandlot, Dodgeball, Moneyball, Hardball, Happy Gilmore 2 coming soon, Rudy, A League of Their Own, Field of Dreams, Hoosiers, Love and Basketball, He Got Game, Jerry Maguire, Cool Runnings, The Hurricane, The Water Boy, $1 Million Baby, Radio, King Richard, 42, Kicking and Screaming, The Replacements, Cinderella Man, For the Love of the Game, Miracle on Ice, The Hustler, The Fan, Space Jam, I, Tanya, Mr. 3000. And I just wrote those down because I was like, dang, like these are, and that's not even, a quarter of them or whatever.
Right.
But if I had to give my favorite ones, I would say Friday Night Lights is up there, For the Love of the Game, Any Given Sunday, and then also White Man Can't Jump. And I think it's funny because when you get into sports movies, there's some that are just really sports movies and they're serious, and then there's some that are just funny. You know what I mean? Like White Man Can't Jump, for me, they did a good job of balancing real hooping with also funny, the funny banter of what you experience on the basketball court, especially in the city and in the hood and stuff like that, and what a white dude has to go through being on the court. But those are probably my favorite movies to watch and to come back to time and time again.
Yeah, when I think about it, it's kind of so The Replacements and Any Given Sunday are two that always stick in my mind as ones that I really enjoyed. From the comedy perspective, both Talladega Nights and Dodgeball have high replay value. Ben Stiller was just so good in Dodgeball.
Yep.
Period. And 42, just the story of Jackie Robinson and is just incredibly profound. And but I also find myself Friday Night Lights and Coach Carter are also two that are kind of really up there for me. But there's so many that you mentioned, and the versatility of the genre is cool because you have the drama aspect, of a lot of these, but you also have some comedies, and sometimes the drama ones have comedic elements within them. And I kind of think that that's just the whole basis is kind of like a reflection of us as humans, right? This we have a little bit of both. It's not all serious all the time, but it's also not all fun and jokes all the time. I do want to, Drew. This has been a great conversation, but I kind of want to talk a little bit now about your show, Too Good to Be Drew. And again, I can't tell you enough. I love the name of the show. So, so tell me a little bit about what made you decide to start podcasting and what your show is all about.
I decided to start podcasting. I was really against it. I was like, man, there are too many voices out there, and
Yeah.
nobody's going to listen to what I have to say. And I've been doing this thing where I've just been trying to just do more. I know, like, I had to further my reach as far as the people out there that need help. So I'm a life and performance coach. I work mostly with student athletes and professional athletes. But I was like, man, there's so many people out here that need guidance. You know, when you're on Instagram or you just see things that are happening, and I was just getting really upset just seeing like, that people didn't have a mentor or somebody that they can come to ask questions to or just tune in to figure out, how do I live my life as a young man or young woman, striving towards the things that I wanted to do. So I just decided went back and forth between because I love talking about sports, but I was like, man, do I really want to build a show on that? And the answer was no. I was like, man, I'd rather come in here and put some goodness out in the world.
Right.
And so it's based in and rooted in coaching, mentoring, and advice. But I just talk about my life. I talk about my journey. I talk about my kind of day-to-day interactions. I'm a realist, but I'm a real optimistic person. And I just wish the world would be more like that, or people could. So I'm just trying to teach people and help people on how to better their mindset, to face every day, to going to work every day, from doing things you don't want to do, for pursuing your athletic career or that job that you want. And just kind of giving people that home base that they can come to, that they can learn, and hopefully they leave out of there with, book recommendations, movie recommendations, but just also a better sense of there need to be more good people in the world, more productive people in the world. And so, not saying I'm the best, not saying I'm perfect at all, but I just wanted to help more people, and I wanted to be that place that if there's a 16 or 18-year-old young man who doesn't have a mentor or has questions about what it's like going to college or what I should do with my career path or what I'm passionate about, that they could write in a question and get it answered on the show or be featured on the show at some point. But I just wanted to build something that people can say like, yo, there are people out here doing the work, to help our younger people, and then also people that feel stuck, whether they're transitioning or that they just don't know what to do. So that was the whole reason for me getting it started. And I've gotten a really, really good feedback from it and good support. So I appreciate everybody that's reached out and shown me some love. So if there's anybody that tunes into this, go like the show, give it 5-star rating, and tune in and get us more listens. I would appreciate it.
What really intrigued me about everything you said there is I think there's been this weird stigma that has come about in the last 10, 15 years when you say mentoring and life coach and stuff like that. They like people almost, for some people, has a predatory sort of
Mhm.
connotation to it just because of, stories that have been, like grifting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, watching your clips and listening to your show. And I'm just kind of like, there's a avenue of, because I think about like back in the 90s, there was like this whole push of be a mentor, and there are people who need help, and that idea always resonated with me because if you think about historically, wisdom is often passed down from generation to generation, and along the way, we sometimes lose that. Where you think about like the generational wars now, where you
Mhm.
know me as like a millennial, my generation was so mad at the generations before us, and now we kind of see that wheel keep on turning, where Gen Z is kind of making fun of the millennial generation, and all that. And I think there is wisdom to be gained generation to generation that allows us to keep moving forward. And I feel like that's a little bit of the ethos of what you're doing, and I think that's incredibly important because like you mentioned earlier that you're a lifelong learner, and I think if we had more lifelong learners in the world, we might be in a little bit of a better place than we are today.
Agreed.
So definitely, everybody listening, check out Drew's show. It will be linked in the description. I do want to touch on your Goodreads streak, though. I think it was like 870 something last time I looked, and it's closing in on 900. And so I'm a reader as well. You see, if you're watching the video podcast here, you see I have books behind me. Drew has books behind him. And what got you? I really got back into reading this past year, like the end of last year. My partner got really into book talk, and she started reading stuff, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get back into reading as well. So we have really varied tastes, right? Like, I think this is her side of the bookshelf. So she does a lot of fiction, romance, fantasy stuff. Me, I'm a little bit more rooted in historical fiction, nonfiction stuff, with a little
Okay.
bit of sci-fi here and there. So, what kind of stuff do you like to read, first of all, and also what got you into really being committed to reading as a daily activity?
Yeah, no problem, man. It's a great question, and it's always great to connect with other readers, man. Like I carry a physical book with me just because I'm always reading a physical book and an ebook. But they're conversation starters and talking about being in a world where we don't, we're the most connected and disconnected we've ever been. We have our phone and we can see everything, but we could be sitting right next to somebody and not even talk to them. And so usually, other readers, if they see you with a book, usually if you don't read, they don't ask you about your book and how it is. They just, okay, this dude has a book. But if they're a
Right.
reader, they'll ask you and it kind of opens up the door. But as far as reading, I like a lot of nonfiction. I like autobiographies, biographies, and memoirs.
Mhm.
This year, my goal was to read more books by women authors, and then also more fiction, because fiction helps us. It helps us with critical thinking. It helps men with empathy and sympathy, which we're not great at. We're working on. We're trying to get better. And so, but I always try to put, I've always been a person who tries to get better. So before I even became a certified coach, I'm always trying to figure out ways. Okay, I want to get smarter. What can I do? Okay, I want to learn about this area of things. What should I do? And I found the biggest thing for me is that I like reading. I watch TV, but I try not to be stuck in front of the TV and on my phone. And reading was a way to do that. And so a couple years ago, like I said, I had a friend. His name is Nate Costa. I played college football with him. And he said one of the most interesting things to me when we were in college, because we were coming up on New Year's. And I was like, hey, man, have you made any New Year's resolutions? And he was like, no. And I was kind of like, dang, this dude sucks. Like, he doesn't try to get better or anything. Like, and then he went on to explain, he was like, I don't wait for the beginning of the year to work towards things that I want to do or to try to be a better person. I implement those things in real time. And so it sat with me. I was like, yo, I've been doing it all wrong. I've been just making New Year's resolutions this whole time. And so like when I want to do something, I put it into action at that certain point or really relatively soon. So fast forward, at the beginning of the year, I just said, what am I trying to do to get better this year? And I said, man, I want to read more. And this was 3 years ago. And I said, man, how about we just make sure we read? Even as a coach, I try to break things down. I didn't never said I wanted to read, 900 straight days. I said, hey, let's just read 15 minutes a day.
Mm.
And I was like, all right, I think that's doable. And then once a couple weeks went by, I saw, it's kind of addicting. It's a
Yeah.
little bit like, if you have a Nike watch and you work out or you close your rings and stuff like that, you start to get used to it and you're trying to do it. But I started to do it and I was like, all right, well, got to 3 weeks, got to a month, got to 2 months. And I was like, all right, well, let's see how long we can keep this going. And pretty soon before I knew it, it's the first one of the first things I do when I wake up. I read for 10 or 15 minutes. There's some days I read for an hour, 2 hours, but we make sure we read for 15 minutes. But going back to that, I wasn't a big reader growing up. My parents didn't make me read. And I ran into one of one of my mentors who coached me in football in high school, ran into his family. His mom pretty much started to make me read. She asked me for a book report. It took me like 2 or 3 years to do it because I thought she was playing. But outside of that, when I was in college and when I was about to graduate, I said, how am I going to continue to learn after college? Like, what's going to help me do that? And I decided that reading was going to help me do that. And so that's kind of my journey and my path with reading is I'm a lifelong learner, but I also just take time to learn about things and people that I want to know about. And as a coach, it helps me to have books and material to point my clients to that are dealing with some similar things. And it kind of I'm challenge everybody to be a reader, because there's something out there for everybody that can help them or just something that they can like to escape from this world and from reality. But it's definitely, I don't hear anybody that said, man, I read so many books and now I'm a terrible person. Like it's usually a self-development thing or just something you use to get better, to see other points of view, and to honestly to just do something different than the norm.
Yeah, and I also my goal of reading was also just kind of to, expand the horizons, like you had mentioned. And this year, I've kind of consumed books about, like, I think, just societal stuff, historical stuff. Like I just finished a historical fiction book called The Personal Librarian, which is about Belle DaCosta Green, who was the librarian for J.P. Morgan at the turn of the century, and she was a black woman, but pretended to be a white woman to get this job.
Mm,
And it was a really fascinating life story, and the author has a note at the end about how some things are altered, but it's mostly fact. And so it talked a lot about you know different personas, right? And you think about like an athlete is a good example. They're one way with their close inner circle. They're another way when they're doing interviews, right?
Yeah.
And this book kind of talked about that, the importance of identity and how you can lose the identity just to fit in and stuff like that. So, it's a one I'd never heard of her story before. So,
Yeah.
now I know. And two, it allows you to kind of think about different things. I find that in this current climate that we're in, it's a it's so charged with rhetoric, spin, talking points that ultimately people want you to stop reading,
Yeah.
and because you're going to find out some things. And like I recently read a book called The Rape of Nanking, which is a genocide that happened during the World War II era in China by the Japanese military.
Mhm.
And I'd never heard of it, and anybody I talked to about it, they also had never heard of it, and it was just gruesome, grisly stuff, but it was an incredibly written book. And I think learning about that stuff is so important because so much stuff we've seen now has been kind of neutered in the way that it's presented, especially when it comes to nonfiction and that sort of thing. And when I was a kid, like my reading started with like the Harry Potter series.
Okay.
And but going into my 20s, it kind of fell off, right? And I just stopped reading for multiple years at a time. I read articles and stuff, but not actual long form books.
Yeah.
And really, like I said, the middle to end of last year really reintroduced me to it. And one thing that I found is, I don't know if you feel this way, but kind of going into a book and rereading it like a decade or so after you originally read it. So it happened to me recently when I reread The Great Gatsby. And
Okay.
I remember thinking it was so profound when I was in high school, and I read it in high school, and I was like, oh yeah, this is new money, old money, blah blah blah, and it's still that, but also you're just like, wow, these people kind of suck,
Yeah.
like when you're like, it's a dated book now, obviously, because it happened in over a century ago, but yeah, it's just kind of it's such a immersing activity, and you can learn so much. Like
Yeah.
I had read a book about it was called Unwell Women, which is about how healthcare has shifted and how for women over the years, and how it's always kind of been against them, and it's always been with the intent of making sure they're having children
Mm.
above their own personal health. And it's the type of stuff that gets you mad, but it also
Yeah.
gets you informed.
Yeah.
um, if you could say, what are some of the better books that you've read this year?
Awesome. I wanted to say what you said, man. You just even like, and I think this is how book people connect because you said two or three books now that I'm like, all right, I might got to make sure I get the name from those from him because it is about we got to educate ourselves because I think we have a platform, or I think that with my platform where I don't want to sit down and tell my listeners wrong information. And I also want to say information and I want my listeners to go look it up and double check and be like, let me see, is Drew actually right saying this? So, but I appreciate you giving me that. And I laughed when you said the Harry Potter books because that's where I started too. And I was reading them and I might have been through a couple of them and I was like, man, these words are hard. Like, I don't even know if I'm saying them right. So
Yeah,
that was my like first experience with my mom actually buying me books. I think I had the Harry Potter, the Chamber of Secrets, and the Sorcerer's Stone. Like I vividly remember those books.
yeah,
But books I've read this year, I've read 17 so far. When Crack Was King was a very good book. So we talk about, the OJ documentary and them talking about, the interactions of the 70s and the 80s with neighborhoods and black people and police. This brings that more into context with talking about the government pretty much bringing crack cocaine over here, bringing cocaine over here and kind of getting it into the communities. But it's just a very good book. It follows around 4 or 5 people and their experience growing up with it and their parents and their family dynamics. So it's just a very awesome, awesome written book. This Thing of Ours, well, When Crack Was King is nonfiction. This Thing of Ours by Frederick T. Joseph is a book about an athlete who gets hurt in college and he has some identity issues that he's trying to get through and find his friend group. It was a very good book. Has a lot of great stuff for me as a grown man, but also I think it's great for this younger generation because it talks about identity, it talks about friendship, it talks about injury, adversity, overcoming, family dynamic, those types of things. And then it's funny because I do have a pile of books behind me, and I'm just talking about books from this year, but And then I would say I read James by Percival Everett. It
Oh
was a
yeah.
very, very good book. Percival Everett's become one of my favorite authors. I've read, I think, about four of his books in the last 2 years. And they're just very, just eye-opening. They're very well written. They're very descriptive in what they do and what they talk about. And then I'm trying to think. And then my favorite book of all time is Mike Tyson, Undisputed Truth.
Mm.
They talk about just Mike Tyson. He's the youngest world head. So y'all know the Mike Tyson that fought Jake Paul. I didn't watch that fight because I know the Mike Tyson who was Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
And so the youngest heavyweight champion at 20 years old, the first person to unify the WBC, WBA, and IBF championship belts. He's in the clubs partying with Eddie Murphy and all these other celebrities at the age of 18, 19. Like, so just Mike Tyson's just awesome. And it's just a book that's ahead of its time, but it's also good to learn more about him. So those are probably just four reads that I've really loved and I really enjoy. And I recommend them to people. But also, like I said, I love biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs and looking into people's lives.
One that I actually consumed as an audiobook recently was Matthew McConaughey's
Very
memoir,
good.
Green Lights, which I think would have been good as a physical read, but
Hmm.
is super enhanced as an audiobook because he is narrating it.
Yeah.
And so, you got the McConaughey voice and all that, and it was just like this guy's life is crazy. It's
Yeah.
just like the things that he did, and I love a good memoir. Another good one is Jeanette McCurdy's memoir. I'm Glad My Mom Died is what it's called, and which
Okay.
is kind of a really fascinating look at the world of child actors and
Hmm.
how damaging that is. And they're actually turning that into a show or a movie, I think, with Jennifer Aniston.
Okay.
So those are two memoirs that I've read this year that kind of stuck out in my mind. But Drew, I've kept you way too long. I Before we started recording, I was like, "Oh yeah, 45 minutes," and then it's gone a little over. Can you let everybody know where they could follow you and cast and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find me at just my name, Drew Jay Davis .com. That's my website. But most social handles is the same, Drew Jay Davis. You can find me on Too Good to Be True. Somebody told me, "Yo, you're saying true on there." I'm like, I probably am because I struggle with my DR and they sound like TR. But Too Good to Be Drew, available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And just Omar, I appreciate you having me, man. And definitely, I want to get with you and read a book or two, this year, within the next year, whatever your schedule is, whether it's on your channel, my channel, through IG Live. Let's definitely just keep pushing this reading initiative. And I think you read a lot of interesting stuff. And you're a person, like you said, we flew by, in this 45-minute conversation. But these are the types of interactions and the types of relationships and type of collaborations I want to have. So, man, open invite. Let's pick a book, whether if it's in your realm or in mine, and then sit down and discuss it. I think it'll be great for viewers and just great for us too.
I love that idea. So we'll definitely make that happen. And once again, thank you, Drew, for joining me. If you enjoyed this podcast, we are available as well on Apple Podcasts, video on Spotify, and on YouTube as well. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. And we will see everyone later.